Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. And my next guest, very good friend of mine, also technically my boss over at Gridiron Ratings.
Boss,
of course,
that's silly.
talking about Jeff DiMatteo. Jeff, what is going on, man? Thank you for coming on.
Man, thanks for having me, John. I'm thrilled to be here. Boss is a strong word. I don't think we could really go there. We do some work together at Gridiron Ratings. How's that sound?
I mean, I don't know, the way you see Matthew tweeting these days.
I'm his boss. He reports to. He's a junior analyst. If you've seen any of our previous shows, he cannot be a senior analyst anymore.
Yes, obviously talking about Jeff, Gridiron Ratings. Like you said, thank you for coming on. And the topic here today is your San Francisco 49ers. We're continuing this divisional breakdown. We're covering the NFC West right now. And 49ers in 2020 faced a down year after being the NFC champions in 2019. They faced a ton of injuries, ended up finishing last in the NFC West with a 6-10 record. Ended up with the 6th overall pick, which they then traded to Miami for the 3rd overall pick, so that they could find their starting quarterback, as head coach Kyle Shanahan put it in the end. They end up drafting North Dakota State quarterback Trey Lance. The Niners are a team loaded with talent. They just got hit by the injury bug real bad in 2020. Jeff, what are the feelings amongst the fan base as it pertains to the Niners in 2021?
Well, I always try to divorce my fandom from my takes, but I think the fan base is feeling pretty good. We love Trey Lance. We love the idea that he's going to be like this, and I say I use that pretty loosely. Kind of like the second coming of Pat Mahomes is the way everyone seems to feel about it. I don't know if I'm entirely in that camp yet. I want to see a preseason game before I get too excited. But, getting everybody back is going to be making a whole new season. Getting Nick Bosa back is going to matter. Getting Eric Armstead back is going to matter. We lose a little bit in the secondary. We've got Fred Warner's an all-world linebacker, so the defense is pretty stout. The running backs are all back. The O-line is healthy. I mean, everything looks good. I feel like the arrows are pointing up in a lot of ways, but the division didn't get easier. Seattle improved their O-line. Arizona's tough, and you got the Rams adding a new quarterback. So, I mean, I think the fan base is excited. I think there's a lot of optimism that we're going to get back to that Super Bowl caliber team we saw a couple of years ago. But, there's definitely a handful of question marks.
Yeah, sorry, I'm fidgeting with this headset over here. But no, like you said, as it pertains to the Niners, definitely some question marks there, but definitely trusting Kyle Shanahan, right? What him and John Lynch have kind of built over the last few years. Yeah, yes, Jeff puts out a huge heart over his chest.
Hand heart. Got the hand heart out.
Hand heart for the listeners that are listening on the podcast platforms and haven't migrated to YouTube yet. But let's talk about the quarterback position, because you talked about Trey Lance, you talked about Jimmy G, or Trey Lance potentially becoming Patrick Mahomes, but you have you have some feelings here because Jimmy G, he was a starter for 6 games last year, dealt with an ankle injury. Just 33% of his games last year did he have more than 13 points, 13.2 fantasy points. Wasn't a very good year, but he was on a 16-game pace of just 19 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Was the quarterback 30 in terms of fantasy points per game. The Niners, as we talked about before, drafted Trey Lance with the 3rd overall pick. As we previously mentioned in terms of ADP, Jimmy G, or I guess I didn't mention this, but I'll mention it now. Jimmy G going off the board as the QB 35, according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP. Trey Lance going off the board as the QB 20. Jeff, how do you approach this situation?
Well, if I'm in redraft, if we're talking 12-team redraft, I'm avoiding it altogether. Because there's a very real possibility that Lance is getting overdrafted this season, and he may not play at all. Jimmy G didn't get a great start last season. And I try not to be too much of an apologizer when it comes to Jimmy G, but for the most part, when he's played, he's been pretty good. The 3 games last year, notwithstanding, there was some up and down. And truthfully, the 49ers, Debo didn't play well last year, despite people really being in on him. You had Kittle was banged up. He was in and out of the lineup, even when Jimmy G was playing. He was basically throwing it to guys like, Kendrick Bourne and, the dried up husk of Trent Taylor. It gets pretty tough to be a good quarterback thrown to those guys. The receiver group this year looks a lot stronger. Ayuk obviously showed up in the second half. Debo, we need to see a couple more strides from him in terms of route running in order for these quarterbacks to be viable. Dynasty, you got to have Lance, but man, I don't know. I'm avoiding it in terms of redraft altogether because I don't know that I'm feeling what the market is feeling, that Lance is going to suddenly be a QB2 for fantasy in 2021.
Yeah, I think if it's going to come down if Trey Lance gets on the field, and that's going to be the most important thing, right? Because, like you said, Jimmy G he's been okay when he's been in, or when he's been healthy. I think that's the problem is that he's not always healthy, does deal with some injuries. Right. And I think that's the biggest concern there because whoever the quarterback is in this Niners offense, they're going to have success really because Kyle Shanahan's going to put them in a position to have success. Obviously, we've seen guys like Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard come in and struggle at times with, decision making and things like that. But Jimmy G, a veteran, so he's going to run this offense the way Kyle wants it run. Again, just comes down to, is he going to stay healthy? And I think that alone, that risk right there, that probability there that Jimmy G could get hurt is just, even in a 1 quarterback league. I mean, in Superflex, obviously you're going to take Trey Lance because the upside is just too high to pass on.
Sure.
But in redraft, even, I think, as a late round pick, with the last pick of your draft, why not draft Trey Lance? I mean, he's going QB 20, so you're obviously not paying that price, but depending on what league you're in, maybe guys don't know Trey Lance, the kid from North Dakota State, in your casual fantasy league. And hey, you know what? I wouldn't mind getting, both of these guys, Jimmy G and Trey Lance. Or I was gonna say, my initial thought was get a guy like Kirk Cousins, who I think is super undervalued, and you could get him and a guy like Trey Lance and stick those 2 guys on your roster and kind of see what happens with Trey Lance. And because if he ever gets that job, the rushing upside alone with Trey Lance it makes him, a top of potential. I don't want to dub the kid a league winner, but just we've seen it before with rushing quarterbacks and their ability to carry your fantasy team, especially if you get them really, really late or really cheap, as in undrafted or off waivers.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that in the sense that he has tremendous upside. My concern, being a fan and having watched Kyle Shanahan and being a fan of his dad, I lived in Colorado actually when he was with the Broncos and was winning Super Bowls there. I'm showing my age with my gray hair and all that here. This is going to be a situation where Jimmy G, if he's winning ball games, they're not going to pull him. If they are, let's just say we're at the midway point of the season here and we're, looking at a team that's, 7-2, or 6-2 or something like that, they're not going to suddenly pivot to Lance. Jimmy's going to have to struggle mightily. He's going to have to lose a few games. It's going to have to be apparent that he's not getting it done for us to make that change. So this could be a real situation where we look at, say, the Kansas City Chiefs a few years ago when they had Alex Smith came in. The guy was crushing the world in fantasy even, and he was the number 1 in Kansas City. Mahomes was holding the clipboard. He didn't play until week 17. He came in, he had a so-so game. Alex Smith was gone. And Mahomes took over the next year, and the rest is history. That is, I think, what Kyle and the 49ers are looking to do this year. They'd like to hold Lance in reserve as best they can, drive up Jimmy G's value, and not punt him. They want to trade him. They want to follow that same Chiefs kind of design because they couldn't get what they wanted for him this year. If they could have, they might have had Deshaun Watson instead of Trey Lance. And so the move right here is to, if you're in Dynasty or if you're in a keeper or if you want to grab him and speculate on him with your last pick, there's worse things you can do with Trey Lance. There's worse things you can do with your last pick, right? But I would go in with tempered expectations for play time. When he gets in, I expect him to play well, but I don't know that I expect to see him a whole heck of a lot in 2021. I know it's a contrarian take, as it seems like everybody and their brother's like, we're going to see Lance right away. I'm like, not if 49ers are winning ball games, you won't. So
Yeah,
that'll be
and
the pivot point there.
yeah, and I think I can agree with that take, right? I mean, there's no reason to bench a healthy Jimmy G out of the gate. Like you said, he's either got to get injured or completely face plant, and I mean, I don't think he face plants, but the probability, like we talked about, of him getting injured, that's I mean up there with any player, but it just seems like Jimmy G struggles to stay healthy. All right, let's move on to the running back position, and the Niners running game is one that fantasy managers like to target because of the production running backs have had in the Shanahan scheme. Raheem Mostert was the lead guy last year in terms of fantasy points per game, 12 and a half PPR points per game, finishing as the RB27. Jeff Wilson was the RB30, 11.9 fantasy points per game. Actually led all Niners running backs in total fantasy points. But he's dealing with an injury right now and will miss the start of the year. And then enter third round pick Trey Sermon, drafted out of Ohio State, was in line for is in line for what seems to be a meaningful role, especially with Wilson expected to miss some significant time. In terms of ADP, Mostert is the RB28, Jeff Wilson, obviously the RB62, and Trey Sermon, the RB32. So you got Mostert and Sermon about 4 spots apart. How are you approaching the Niners backfield, Jeff?
Well, the 49ers backfield is going to be a little bit of I don't want to say a dumpster fire, but we're going to have 2 viable players out of there. But it's going to be tough because you're not going to get an RB1. You might not get an RB2. It might be 2 RB3s this year. Jeff Wilson's actually injured. He'll be down for, I believe, the first 6 weeks at a minimum. I believe he tore his MCL getting out of a chair after working out. And it was a really weird series of events, but he's down and out. So we're not going to see him. He'll probably start the season on PUP or something like that, pushing him out to at least midseason. Mostert's going to get the lead dog carries, but it sounds to me, and we haven't seen him because they're not in official camp yet, but it seems to me like Sermon's going to make it tough for them to keep him in that role all year. So these guys might be in that kind of 1A, 1B kind of a situation where we can't count on one guy, say, getting the catches and another guy getting goal line. They might both just be getting all of it. The guys I might be looking out for, just because by the time August 15 rolls around and a lot of those office drafts and family drafts are happening, those guys, their ADP, I think, is going to spike a little bit more. We're going to hear more and more about the Niners run game, and Mostert will be a 4th rounder. Sermon will be a 3rd rounder. People are going to be going crazy over running backs. I might go and pop for Wayne Gallman at the end of the draft because he'll be the guy that comes off the bench if anything happens to either of those guys. Sermon's had 2 LCL injuries. He's had a broken back. He's had a collarbone injury. Like, this guy's had a litany of injuries going back to high school. So it's not like he's completely healthy. And Mostert's been nicked up most of his time in the NFL, and he's already 29. So it's not like he's a spring chicken. So there's a very real possibility that we get a steady dose of Wayne Gallman at some point this year. And they drafted Elijah Mitchell in the 6th round. And don't forget about Jermichael Hasty, who was picked last year. Any one of those guys can run this zone scheme. So whoever the 49ers plug in is going to be viable. The trouble is you might be looking for that guy week to week, and you might be finding him on your waiver wire in week 4, 5, 6. So those are just some names to keep an eye on: Gallman, Mitchell, and Hasty.
Yeah, no, I definitely like, Wayne Gallman's a guy that he was called a Mr. Necessary here at the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast during the November, December months, because he was not perfect, but he was definitely necessary in the economy that we were living in, where it was hard to find an RB2. But Trey Sermon, I mean, like you said, I think he's going to see some significant work out the gate. I almost like this Niners running game better if Jimmy G's the guy, because when you throw Trey Lance into the mix, like you talked about, good luck trying to figure out week to week. Like, it's going to be almost impossible to figure out what Niners running backs are going to do if Trey Lance is in the mix, because Trey Lance is stealing rush attempts, he's stealing rushing touchdowns, he's stealing targets from the running backs. Like, I mean, obviously, I say that to say, obviously, rushing quarterbacks are statistically shown to have a lower target share to their running backs. So, it makes sense when you're like, why would I dump it off to this running back who's 3 yards away from me or 2 yards away from me when I could just take off and get that 3 yards myself? Right. So, Trey Lance would definitely make the Niners running back situation a little bit definitely unpredictable.
Murkier.
murkier to say the least. Yeah, for sure. But I like your point about these other guys because if Elijah Mitchell, I mean, if anybody goes down, Elijah Mitchell, which Michael Hasty was another guy that I was maybe too high on last year. But if these guys, if if something happens to the guys in front of them, then they can end up with some opportunities. But let's move on to the wide receiver position, man, because this is one where, okay, all right,
You're all right. Okay.
yeah,
Take
getting a little hot.
You need a fan? You want me to? I mean, you want me to get you? Here? I got like a legal. Oh gosh, I hit my camera. Here, let me get you a little fan you off. I know the folks on the pod can't. Only the video folks can see this right now.
Yeah, because
there you go. Cool you off.
Proud to bring up my guy, man, Brandon Ayuk, second-year wide receiver, had a really, really good season. Some injuries, for the 49ers that led to Ayuk leading the Niners in targets last year with 96 in just 12 games played, which he turned into 60 catches, 748 yards, 5 touchdowns, along with 77 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. 16-game pace was just 3 yards shy of 1,000 yards. He was the wide receiver 18 in terms of PPR points per game at 15.4. Then there's Deebo Samuel, on the other hand, dealt with some injuries before the season, having a Jones fracture and then being banged up during the season. Finished as the wide receiver 46 in PPR points per game with 11.5. Was on a 16-game pace of 101 targets, 75 receptions for 894 yards and 4 total touchdowns. In terms of ADP, Ayuk is the wide receiver 25, while Deebo Samuel is the wide receiver 35. How are you attacking the wide receiver position for the 49ers, Jeff?
Deebo is painfully overrated on the ADP. People taking Deebo are thinking they're getting a 1A, 1B situation. That's not going to be the case. It's still going to be George Kittle getting his numbers, and it's going to be the Ayuk show all day, every day. If you go to Matt Harmon's reception perception and check out their success rate in every category, Ayuk crushes. He finishes in the top 15 percentile in every route except for, I think, one. I think it's just the out routes. He just, for whatever reason, scores below average. But if you look at Deebo, for example, on all the same routes, he's in the lower half of the league. He's just not winning in man. He's not winning in zone. He's not running crisp enough routes. He's not winning on any of the routes. So he's not getting himself open. And when you combine that with a guy who hasn't really stayed healthy, he runs a little too angry to be a wide receiver full time. He's a guy that he takes more hits than he probably should, hence his injuries last season. He's going to be the distant third option when it comes to fantasy in this offense. I'm actually dodging Deebo right now unless he falls super late to me. But ADP 35 is way too high. I just can't get behind it. Give me Ayuk all day, though, because he's going to finish probably as a wide receiver 2 when it's done this year.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you on the Deebo Samuel. I think if you draft him thinking he's going to be, like you said, the 1B in this offense, he's going to be the distant third. A lot of his production is going to come from the running game. I mean, not a lot of it, but a decent amount of it is going to come from the running game. And we know that for running backs, even, receptions are more valuable than carries. So it's definitely going to be the case when we're talking about a wide receiver in Deebo Samuel. So give me Ayuk, who is going to have most of his production via the pass game, but can also, as evidenced by the 77 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns last year, can do some of that stuff that Deebo Samuel does in the running game, which I think some people downgrade Brandon Ayuk as well because of some of that. They saw him doing some of those things, and obviously at Arizona State, he was a punt returner and all these things, and he doesn't get enough respect for what he does as a receiver, and I think that's the key. I mean, I'm bullish on Ayuk. I mean, I was bullish on him last year. He was my wide receiver 4 in terms of rookies coming into last year behind, Jefferson. Jefferson was 3, Judy, and then I had CeeDee Lamb at 1, but he was my 4. And it was an unpopular take at the time, but I stuck to it. And he's a guy that I'm really into again in 2021, probably in a bigger way. I've got him inside my top 15 of wide receivers, actually. I'm not going to draft him there because I don't have to, but I'm really bullish on Ayuk this year.
There's a couple of things that need to be remembered when it comes to Ayuk and the running game specifically. Now, when he got his yards rushing, It wasn't with Jimmy G at quarterback. So there's a thing that you always say to me. What's that thing you say to me? So, something matters, and I can't. That word is
Sorry,
just,
I couldn't find my mute button, but context matters.
there it is. Context matters. He's getting 2 rushing touchdowns and 77 yards rushing on a lot of gimmicky plays that were designed because the quarterbacks couldn't effectively target the receivers. And you had no Kittle relieving pressure because he was nicked up for a few weeks. And to be fair, Ayuk had the one really long touchdown run on, I think it was a Monday Night Football, maybe Sunday Night Football. It was a
I think it was
PM
Sunday
game.
Night Football.
Yeah, it was a primetime game. I remember watching it
the
in bed.
Eagles.
Yeah, and so when you start seeing those monster plays take place, you have to remember the context in which they happened. This is a spot where he's in that kind of that X role, if you want to call it that. He's going to be the guy. He's going to get peppered with targets. When Kyle Shanahan ended up in San Francisco, people wanted to identify that X because they remembered Julio Jones, Pierre Garcon, and who was in
Johnson.
What's that?
Andre Johnson.
Andre Johnson, and they had a guy in Cleveland too when he was there for a year.
Josh Gordon.
There he is. So I mainly just wanted to leave that out there because I was like, well, everyone's going to know who this guy is. With him being able to win on every route and against every variety of coverage, there's no reason why he won't see 120 targets. He still has a little bit of room for growth. There's still some things he has to learn, and he's got to stay on the field. We got to get the quarterback situation settled. But we're going to be talking this time next year where he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 1. The ADP is going to skyrocket. If you're trying to buy him in Dynasty, you're going to have to pay for him right now. And I can tell you, he's never going to be cheaper than he is right now. And that's really sad to say because you're going to have to give up a lot for him.
I'm not selling.
Yeah. Well, no, I wouldn't either. There's no way. But if somebody came at me, crazy and wanted to offer me like 4 firsts, maybe I'm listening,
I'm sorry, Brandon. I love you, but 4 firsts. No,
let's get crazy. I'm all about getting crazy.
If my league mates are listening, they don't have Ayuk because I have him. I've drafting him pretty much earlier than where all my dynasty league mates have been drafting him in startups. Because again, like I said, big time believer here. Another guy I am a believer in, George Kittle. Tight end 3 last year in terms of fantasy points per game, 15.6 PPR points per game. Dealt with some injuries throughout the year, only played in 8 games, was still 3rd on the team in targets with 63, turned that into 48 catches, 634 yards, 2 touchdowns, was on a 16-game pace of 126 targets for 96 receptions and almost 1,300 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. Going off the board right now, Jeff, as the tight end 3, how are we feeling about the price tag on Kittle?
I struggle a little bit with it. Now, he's going to get his numbers, right? If anyone's the 1A or 1B in this offense, it's Kittle and Ayuk, right? We know they're going to get their touches. However, I don't know that I can get behind taking him in round 3. When we're looking at, the tight end 3s, you're talking Kelsey, Waller, Kittle all coming off in the first 3 rounds of a lot of drafts. I don't know if I can do it considering he can pretty consistently misses ball games. I might just roll the dice on somebody else like a Hawkinson or a Pitts or, just see what else is out there and go ahead and take a more stable player in the 3rd. There's a lot of upside to be had in place of George Kittle. He's a yak monster. He's amazing, but we don't know what we're going to get out of Trey Lance if he ends up playing. We don't know, is Jimmy just going to only have eyes for Ayuk? There's so many question marks. I love the guy. If he's on my roster, I'm not selling him, but I don't know that I'm buying Kittle at ADP right now.
Yeah, I think those are fair points. I mean, I've been bullish on. I'm just bullish on the Niners as a whole, right? I think ever since Kyle, started. Well, he's been there for 5 years now, and it's been really productive, especially these last 2 years. And they dealt with some bad luck along the way, even leading up to the last 2 years. But you look at Kittle and this offense, and I think, the ceiling is really high, but like you said, is there a floor there with Kittle? Because he does suffer for some injuries, does deal with a lot of things and misses some time. And so you have to wonder, am I better off taking a guy like, Darren Waller, right? At tight end 2, he makes a ton of sense because he doesn't, he's still kind of young, relatively young in terms of mileage, hasn't been playing the position all that long, hasn't been, has obviously missed some games with some of the stuff that he's dealt with, but he's also doesn't play a physical brand like Kittle does. He's not taking as many hits, more of like a possession receiver. And then Kyle Pitts as well. You're just taking the upside shot with him. If he's going off the board as tight end 4. I mean, this is like the 5th segment that I brought up Kyle Pitts, so maybe I have a problem. Uh, this is a nice segue though, because I don't know if you saw, but I have both George Kittle and Kyle Pitts on my Scott Fishbowl team, and I was petitioning to Scott to allow me to change my team name to Kittles and Pitts. But didn't get approved. But
that's Scott, if you're listening, come on, man, have some fun. Let's go. It's I actually had last year. I had Kelsey, who I took in the first round. And I picked at 7. I took Kelsey, and I got Waller in like the 3rd or 4th. And I was doing backflips. I was so excited. I'm a little less excited this year. I've already sustained a pretty serious injury to my squad. And that's a little upsetting, but we'll talk more about that later.
Oh man. Oh man. All right, Jeff.
We're heartbroken. I know. I did it to you. I'm sorry.
Man.
It's such a bad deal, man. Can we just like have like a moment for my man Cam? Because I feel terrible for the guy, and I'm sorry I couldn't go the show without mentioning it. But there's a lot being said right now. There's a lot going on right now. And to see him tear an Achilles in training is just one of the worst things I think I've heard of in training in terms of preseason injuries. And there's a lot of them, right? And if you have him on your fantasy teams, obviously I sympathize with you. But I just want to make sure everyone out there remembers and listens that no matter what you're doing to your fantasy teams, like this man's livelihood and career is on the line right now. And these injuries are not as commonplace for running backs as an ACL. And we're seeing Marlon Mack make a recovery right now, and we hope to see him get back to full speed also. But there's not exactly a laundry list of running backs who make it all the way back right now. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention it throughout the course of the show here. But in terms of the Scott Fishbowl roster, I did draft him because I was very high on him, and I took him pretty early. And my team will survive. We'll be okay. I'm not upset about it. I'm mostly just kind of hoping the guy makes it all the way back. And, some of the ridiculous things we've seen on Twitter can kind of fall by the wayside, and he can prove all the doubters wrong.
No, absolutely. I mean, definitely going to have a conversation about Cam Akers in the next segment when we talk about the Rams, but definitely hurting for him, man. I'm a huge fan of Cam Akers. I didn't even really know much about Cam Akers, but I saw this dude at the combine doing what they call now the Deuce Staley drill, and I was just like, sweet feet. That's what I called him from that moment, because the dude just had lightning quick feet, and he made an impact in year 1. It's just a shame, but let's move on to the 49ers, and I have one last question for you, Jeff, before I gotta let you go, brother.
All right.
How is this division breaking down, and where are the Niners finishing in said division?
Let's just say everybody stays healthy, right? All things are equal. Everybody stays healthy. Realistically, the 49ers are battling for the 2nd or 3rd spot in the division. There's a very real chance that I think Seattle could actually win the division. They've got enough above average players at enough positions that I think they can outpace the Cardinals, the Rams, and the 49ers, say, defensively. They've made some improvements on the O-line, which will help Carson and Russ and those guys. So Seattle should be at the top, with the Niners and the Cardinals, I think, battling for the next 2 spots. The Rams, before the Akers injury, I felt like we're kind of in the basement. And that had nothing to do with Matt Stafford. I think we're all excited about Matt Stafford. But that defense, it's Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, and a bunch of dudes you've never heard of. They lost some really key players, and I think they're going to take a major hit from being the top unit they were last year.
Yeah, that's definitely all fair points. I've got the Niners 3rd actually as well. I do have the Seahawks battling it out with the Rams for that top spot. Pre-Akers injury, I did have the Rams in that top spot. But obviously it was very close between them and Seattle. And with Russell Wilson in Seattle, you never really want to count those guys out anyway. But this was a Rams team that finished 2nd with Jared Goff at quarterback. So makes you wonder, could they potentially get an upgrade? Well, you got to find out in the next segment when we talk about the LA Rams. Hey,
That
but
is what we call a segue.
but Jeff, man, this was awesome, brother. Why don't you tell everybody what it is we got cooking over at Gridiron Ratings and how they can find you, man?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at NFL_DiMatteo. That's DIMATTEO, or at Gridiron Rating. GridironRatings.com is a relatively new site. John, we've been at it for 2 years now. You're new-ish to the team. This is your first year on. We just recently released our 2021 draft playbook. It's our big draft guide. It is over 500 players, nearly 300 pages. It is a digital Bible for your fantasy drafts. We have projections and scoring built in for PPR, half point PPR, and standard, written analysis on gobs of players. We did leave out kickers and team defenses. We went ahead and did IDP instead. We're really proud of our IDP department. We've had a lot of good things going on there. So definitely check us out at gridironratings.com. We actually just did a minor site redesign also. So all of the pages are up to date. John will have some rankings on there very shortly. Actually, they might already be posted, John. You might already be live on the site.
And there you go.
Yeah, we've actually got a beautiful mug of him, too. We've got a profile set up for him right there. Definitely come by for no other reason. Check out the mug shot we've got of John. He's such a beautiful human being. And, it's a great shot. It's a great site. We're really proud of it. We'd love everyone's feedback on it.
Yeah, so you definitely got to go check it out, man. Absolutely. The draft guide, the playbook is a beautiful, beautiful thing of a love of labor, we should call it. A labor of love, we should call it, right?
I think everyone was with you. It was so much work that we got all the words backwards. Like, that's
exactly.
We're delirious.
Our brains are, discombobulated and whatnot. But anyway, you definitely got to check it out, and definitely go check out the site of Gridiron Ratings. If you want to go check out my projections and my rankings as well, so you want to check that out, as well as the whole team. So definitely, Jeff, appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you for coming on. And everybody, we'll catch y'all later. Peace.
Thanks, John.